Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Marcia. I'm the webinar director here at Advice Chaser. Before we introduce our guests and get started, I do need to do a little bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own and however true, funny, or interesting are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. We're thrilled to bring you this educational presentation today. Attendees are muted, but we do encourage you to ask questions using the chat box. And our presenter has said that he welcomes questions during the presentation. So go ahead and let us know if you have any questions or comments. We're happy to pass those on to our moderator to ask our presenter today. One more note, if you have a question and we can't get to it during our webinar today, please go ahead and leave your phone number as well, and we'll reach out to you after today's event. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to today's guests. Today's moderator is Daniel Baumgartner, and he's the founding partner of Terra Nova Asset Management, which was established in 1998. He and his team manage portfolios for high net worth individuals, emphasize personal relationships with their clients, and have a deep commitment to making a sustainable difference in the financial lives of their clients by designing investment strategies which put their interests first. And today's presenter is Josh Kanter. And we've had Josh here before, and we're glad to have him back. Actually, we've had both Josh and Daniel together, so we're glad to have both of them back. Josh earned a bachelor's degree in economics and political science from Emory and earned a Doctor of Law degree in 1987 from the University of Chicago. Following several years in the legal space, Josh decided to focus on his family business, where he currently serves as president of Chicago Financial Inc., a single family office overseeing the complex organizations of trusts, investment and philanthropic entities for a multi-branch and multi-generational family. Through Josh Kanter Wealth Advisory Services, Josh's goal is to provide thoughtful, personalized family, business, and legal consulting services to his clients. He's also the co-founder of Leaf Planner, and Leaf Planner is a solution to develop your own personal family's owner manual. It provides a family with a single source document that will help, got a frog in my throat, that will help identify, organize, and communicate with family members and advisors about every aspect of a family's human, social, and financial capital in a holistic and meaningful way. And that's just a little preview. Let's go ahead and get into this here. I'm going to stop my share, and Josh, I'm going to let you take over. So here we go. Did that work? There we go. Go ahead, Josh. Yep, I can see it. That looks great. You can come off of mute and we'll get started.
Great. Thanks, Marcia. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks for having me back. It's great to be back. Today's topic, as you've seen, is about family meetings. This is sort of the third part of a series that we've been doing. And the first two parts we're calling Leaving a Legacy Beyond Inheritance, and you can find those on the Advice Chaser website and YouTube channel. And we covered some interesting material, I think, in that. And the idea of today and talking about family meetings is to dive a little bit deeper into that. In the first session, we talked a little bit about kind of what is family governance and education, and why does that matter to families who are passing wealth between generations, or maybe even looking at multi-generational wealth. And then we also talked about risks to the family and this idea of family meetings, but in that webinar, we were only able to really touch on it a little bit. So we're hoping to get a little deeper in that today. We also then went into a second webinar that also talked about financial literacy and really kind of what's the type of information that families need to know. We're going to touch on that a little bit today as well. And as Marche mentioned actually earlier, this idea of identifying blind spots and developing a family owner's manual. So those were sort of the first two. And then this is a little bit of a deeper dive into this idea of family meetings. So thanks for joining us. I do want to just reiterate that I'd welcome questions along the way. So if you do have any, please drop them in the chat and Daniel will interrupt us and get us going on those questions. And it probably is worth, although Marche just gave you a little bit of my background, what I think puts me in a somewhat, I don't want to say unique because I hate the word unique, but interesting perspective on this kind of work is that I come at it both as a family member, second generation family member who's been running our own family office and running family meetings for our family for the past 20 years and doing this with other families. And so have really been kind of a part of this family governance and dynamics space for a couple of decades and really looking at best practices and how other families approach different problems. And so I hope that what I can share with you today is useful as you think about these issues, as you go back to your own family and think about what you're trying to accomplish. So with that, let me I guess kick off and get started. Obviously, again, the idea today is to talk about family meetings, and I think it's important in framing that to begin that it really makes a big difference on kind of where the family is. So every family, there's the old joke: if you've met one family office, you've met one family office. And if you've seen one family meeting, you probably have seen one family meeting, but they're all really very different. They need to be customized in different ways. One of the key questions, of course, is whether this is the first family meeting or whether their family has been meeting, whether they've been meeting with a facilitator, how many family members are involved, how many branches are involved, how many generations are involved, what's the age range. A family meeting that includes, young elementary school kids may be very different than one that includes teens or college kids or young adults who are children. So obviously all of these different things, come into designing what these family meetings might look like. How much range of knowledge is there as well? We're often dealing with families, and this is probably going to come up repeatedly today, where you might have a very sophisticated, financially sophisticated, I'll say, because I don't want to pigeonhole anybody, financially sophisticated investment banking child in the family, and maybe an artist or a teacher in the family. And those people have very, very different skill sets. So kind of figuring out where the knowledge range is based on what it is that we're going to talk about in a particular family meeting is also really important. So we look at all these different things in designing that meeting. And then one of the things I really like to say is that we're looking at what does everybody in the family want to accomplish. And obviously, if we're dealing with, a 10 or 12-year-old, maybe we're not quite as interested in what they want to accomplish as what the matriarch and patriarch want to accomplish. But I feel it's really important, especially if you're engaging an outsider like me or anybody else to facilitate and help design these meetings, that that person is acceptable to the whole family. I see too many situations where, mom or dad or whoever the relevant person is saying, hey, yes, let's hire Josh or somebody like Josh. And that's great. But it really is, to me, not about who's paying the bill. It's about making sure that that's a good, comfortable fit with the entire family. So I would encourage you, if you do look for facilitation, to make sure that that's something that you're involving the whole family in that process of choosing that facilitator. The idea, again, about family meetings, I'd say is, one of the things that I like to say is that family meetings are about the business of running the family. And I say it very carefully that way because there was a point in my career where we were in the venture capital business and I was running one of our portfolio companies and we had to put it through bankruptcy. And a bankruptcy lawyer came to me and said, you need to understand that you're now running two businesses. You're running the business of the business and you're running the business of the bankruptcy. And it's a completely different bucket and thing. And by the way, it's also a second full-time job. But I think that that's a nice frame to think about what these family meetings are about. They're not an extension of the family business if there is one, whether that's an operating business or whether that's an asset, a portfolio of financial assets or anything else. Running the family is itself a business. And so I really encourage you to think about those as two different things that have that skill set. And one of the places that that's really important is to realize that when you think about how are we going to do this, where are we going to do this? You see on here, I have a comment, hold a family meeting somewhere comfortable. And to that, it could be that that's at somebody's house. It could be that it's at a hotel. It could be lots of different things. But I would encourage you to think of it not as an extension of the family business. So if there's a family business and dad or somebody in the business has a boardroom in their office, that's maybe not a good place, because think about the power dynamics that go along with that venue and all the things that come along with that. Pick a neutral place where everybody can be comfortable, because it's this family meeting is a very different animal. It's not the same as, a boardroom meeting that you might be having with that operating company. I encourage you to think about and remember, depending upon ages, right? Maybe this is a young family and everybody's in the San Francisco area, or maybe it's a, multi-generational family like ours and people are spread out across the country. Everybody's coming to this at that moment in time with their own travel, with their own hassles back in their life, with, oh, I just left my work, or I just left my kids, or I just spent last night in the animal hospital with my dog. I don't really care what those different pressures are, but it is important to recognize that everybody's coming with those different pressures. And so I encourage families, for example, to come in the night before, have dinner together, remember what it's like to, first of all, exhale, relax a little, and remember what it's like to be a family together before you jump into, because these can be pretty meaty topics, right? They can be confrontational topics occasionally. Let everybody kind of ease into it and remember why they're a family together and why they're there together. Obviously, in some instances, sorry, Daniel, were you jumping in?
Josh, someone had the question of how often should you do family meetings?
That's a great question. I personally, so I think it depends to some extent, of course, on what you're defining as a family meeting. But I would say most families that I've seen that are successfully doing this repeatedly over a multi-year period are probably meeting annually. There might be some conference calls or Zoom calls, obviously, in today's day and age that are put in there more frequently. And in some instances where the topics are coming up, I would say, in my family, my siblings and I are actually, for the last couple of years, have been meeting by conference call monthly, simply because there's been a lot of stuff that's been going on. But the real formal family meeting in person that is really designed to start to give people a sense of communication and learn these tools together, I'd err toward annually. I have a family I work with that does it quarterly. I think it's a lot. And it's a lot to expect, again, when you have people who have their own careers, their own families. It's a big commitment. Right. So it also may depend on geography. If people are coming in, if everybody is local, it's obviously a little bit easier. If you're trying to bring people in from across the country or across the world, where obviously we have families who are living all around the world these days, and maybe there's little kids involved, right? All these different things. So it's a bit of an individual decision. I think much less than annually is hard, because you lose a little bit of continuity, and maybe more than a couple times a year is probably a lot to ask of family members. Right. But very individual decision.
I'm just going to break in here. Sorry, Josh, we're getting a little bit of static, and I think it's because you're accidentally hitting your microphone.
Sorry.
So, no worries. So
I won't gesticulate. How's that? Is that better if I do that?
I think if you're not moving back and forth, or if you want to just unplug and replug in your connection there, that's just kind of technical.
I'll try not to move. Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. So the other thing that you'll see on here are various ideas, like including fun activities. Again, it's about bringing a family together and making sure that they remember what it's like to be a family. We've seen families, or our family has done escape rooms together during these, especially if you're doing a multi-day. If you're bringing people in from all around the world or around the country, then obviously doing things like, meals together, go to a museum together, go do something fun together. And again, this escape room was really a lot. We pitted generations against each other in an escape room, and it was really fun. Facilitation is something to consider, whether obviously, somebody like me who does this professionally, but the real key to the facilitation question is that it's very hard, and we're going to talk about this in a bit, about this idea of roles and responsibilities within a family. And it's very hard, if you're a family member, to be trying to take that hat off and say, okay, here's my opinion as Josh, the family member, but by the way, now I've got to facilitate this meeting. So consider facilitation as you do that as well. And then one of the things I really encourage families to think about is, what is a family meeting not about? And I say that because too many times I see families who are toying with the idea of a family meeting, and what ends up happening is they think that this is the opportunity we have to open up the balance sheet to the entire family. And I would argue that that's not the way. This is not a binary choice, that there are lots of things that can be talked about that we're going to talk about today that are values based or history based or how things work based, that don't require opening up the full balance sheet and saying to everybody in the family, by the way, here's what the balance sheet looks like. And on the counter side to that, I'd say, people today, especially my generation, really forget how easy it is to find some of this information. So there are families who think they're hiding information from their kids, and yet maybe they're flying on a private jet, or they're hiding information from their kids, but they are, you can look up your house on Zillow, right? I mean, so just being conscious of how much information really is out there, particularly for your teenage kids or your young adult kids who can be, Google is a powerful tool, as we all know, and making sure that you're really be conscious of that. So anyway, that's a little bit about, I guess, kind of framing the idea of the family meeting. The next thing I like to take families through is really thinking about, why are they there? Why are they doing this? And this is a very individual, again, kind of process that most of the time somebody like me would take your family through, or you can take yourself through, of thinking about, what are we trying to accomplish? What's the opportunity? So this slide, I would say, would get normally filled in by the family. So this is just an example of things that have come up. Maybe you're looking at it as the ability to build something special, to come together through philanthropy, or to build effective communication. Many families look at this as a way of helping to avoid the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations proverb. Again, kind of communication, finding areas of agreement and disagreement, really understanding, where do families not just agree, but where do they disagree, can be an important part of this process. And lots of things, as you can see on here. So I encourage families to think about, again, kind of why are they here, and having a little bit of framing around that to help them remember why they're spending this time, that they could be doing other things. A framework I showed in one of the prior webinars that we did is from a colleague of mine, Dennis Jaffe. And I really love this as it relates to the family meeting, because I think that if you look at these two paradigms, or this paradigm shift from what he labels as paternalism and all of these characteristics of paternalism to partnership, is really the idea of moving from a matriarch or patriarch, or a very top-down family decision-making approach, to a very collaborative partnership involving the whole family. And in many ways, that's what the family meeting is most about, right? It's moving from mom or dad making decisions to working as a team, from suspicious behavior to trusting behavior, from opportunistic to professional management, or whatever it may be, from having passive heirs, most importantly, to engaged heirs. So lots of this is about this kind of paradigm shift of opening up control and opening up discussion, from maybe mom and dad, or grandma or grandpa, or whoever it is, doesn't matter, right? But to a broader family audience. So I really like that that framework of this paradigm shift. Another early thing, we haven't even gotten into the family meeting yet. Another early thing that I try to really get families to do is think about, what should the ground rules of these meetings be? And I think, again, that's really important. We think about a certain kind of behavior that's required in a boardroom, or in class, or in different environments. And the family meeting, frankly, is no different. We should be thinking about, what are the ground rules that should go along with that meeting. Again, this is something I typically will try to have, and I believe you should try to do yourselves, have somebody do with you, but don't have a list on the table. Like, let everybody make that list up, and then maybe fill in. But some typical things that I really feel are important. This idea of it being a safe space, right? It's really important to be a safe place to express your views and to be able to communicate. That nothing is right or wrong. There's really, family meetings have to be a place where you can be challenging each other with different ideas. That frankly, it's okay to be bored, or it's okay to find something, really to not understand something, and say, hey, explain that to me again. These are areas where we're probably talking about things that are not second nature to most of the participants. They may be to some, and again, we'll talk about that, right? But that this isn't second nature. We really have to make sure that people feel comfortable. I'm still talking to my family members about how trusts operate 20 years into this exercise. And it's really important that they be comfortable to say, hey, time out. I know you've gone through that again, but I don't remember. Some families want to have a cell phone policy or an electronics policy to say, look, when you come into this meeting, you're in this meeting just like you might in a boardroom. Put the phone away. Don't sit on your phone. Don't be answering emails or checking Instagram or doing any of these things. That's, again, it's a very family specific decision to make that decision. Should people show up? Should people come ready to work? Should people come having read whatever was sent out as advanced materials? Some of these things may or may not be applicable depending upon the kind of family meeting, but the idea is just to have the family come to almost an agreement. Some families actually reduce this to an agreement and make everybody sign it. I'm not a fan of that, but it doesn't really matter. The idea is to make sure that everybody's coming together with a common understanding of the ground rules of what these meetings are about. So I want to say, clarify also that, these are not, the idea of the family meeting is not one and done, right? I mean, this is an ongoing process. As I've now said, I've probably way more times than you want to hear in this webinar. My family's been at this for over 20 years together. That would be 20 annual family meetings, or a lot more if you count all the monthly meetings. And this is long-term work. You have to some extent, really be committed to it. You can leave it and come back to it. You can change the rules along the way. We used to have a hard and fast rule on those ground rules that everybody had to be there. And then we finally softened on that and said, you know what, if you can't be there for a meeting, it's okay. You don't have to be there. So you have to think about those, but you do have to think about this as long-term work. And I love this story that's in one of Jay Hughes's books. For many of you may be familiar with some of Jay's books. And I think that this is such a great story. So it's a story about a general who, one of Napoleon's generals, who's supposedly looking out over his estate with his gardener next to him. And he says to the gardener, but I don't see a copper beech tree. And the gardener says something to the effect of, well, General, a copper beech tree takes 150 years to grow. And the general, without missing a beat, says, well, then we must get started right away. Go plant one. And I think the idea of that resonates to me in this idea of the family meeting is that it's never too early to start. And it's an ongoing long-term process that really, quite frankly, is never finished because it just hands off to the next generation and the next. And so consider that this is really a long-term project. So, okay, when we finally get into the actual family meeting, we've set some ground rules, we're doing it in a nice, comfortable place. If it's a family's first meeting, a lot of the time, I really like to have the matriarch and patriarch, again, whoever really is sort of responsible for this, do a little bit of framing themselves. What is it that the family doesn't know? I've seen so many situations where, the kids are finally getting exposed when the family has a little bit of wealth or a lot of wealth. And yet they don't know that it may not have been that all long ago and there was no wealth, or mom and dad were relying on grandma and grandpa for help, or whatever the situation may be. Oh, excuse me. I'm so sorry.
Josh,
Yeah.
how long do these meetings typically last? Can you give us an idea there?
Yeah, I think that I'd say a half a day to a full day, but if it's a full day of this kind of, quote unquote work, that's a lot. I would say it's more likely to be, something like a 6-hour day with a break, or it depends to some extent. I think if you're building in some educational pieces or bringing in some other advisors, this is pretty typically kind of heavy emotional. You're paying attention. So it's a little bit hard to go for much. And again, depending on ages and things like that, right? It's a little bit hard to go for too much. So I find the vast majority of these work really well if they're a good solid half a day to maybe a full day, again, with a sort of what I would consider a shortened full day with a lunch break or something that's kind of breaking it up. But doing too much more than that would be hard, I think. So, so as I was saying, I think that having the family get a little bit of family history here is really important. Having everybody talk a little bit about what are they, again, as we talked about earlier, what are they hoping to get out of this? Maybe there's a family business and there's some discussion about what are the expectations for that business? Will it be held? Will it be sold? Will it be taken over by other members of the family? How do parents want to engage their children? How do the children want to be engaged? And so these are all kinds of things that help start to set a stage. You're not going to answer all these questions, but start to set a stage kind of around one of these things, what these family meetings are about, and setting that kind of baseline. Then I really talk with families about what it is that they want to tackle. And obviously this can be all over the board, but here's a list of fairly common agenda items for the first several meetings. But again, going back to that frequency that Daniel said somebody asked about, and the length of time, I typically am saying to a family, if I show them this list, I'm probably saying this is a 5 to 10 year agenda. So it looks simple, but this is a lot of stuff to be tackling as a family. But typical, and families have to come at this, wherever. I like to say, of course, my job is to meet the family where they are, and in that sense, it's what's important to them right now. It's not, there's no order that this has to go in. This has to go in the order that works best for the family. And so maybe the family is dealing with family relationship issues, or maybe roles and responsibilities is really important, or maybe understanding theoretically what is the family's capital. And by that, and we're going to talk about that, I don't mean just financial capital, but what's their human capital, what's their intellectual and social capital. Maybe access to the family's wealth is a really important question at this moment in time. Maybe fairness and equity is really important. So all of these different things, right? How to deal with family properties, how to deal with family governance, maybe creating a family bank, maybe thinking about, is the family ready for a family office? All of these are different things that we have to kind of plug and play when the family is ready for them. But this is a big, big agenda. So what I'm hoping now we're going to do for the rest of the time today is talk specifically about some of these topics and what does that really look like when you dive into it in a family meeting context. So I hope you'll bear with me and we'll keep plowing ahead. One of those, as I said, is kind of family relationships. And if you've been on the prior webinars with me, I think you probably have heard me say this, but one of these stories that I just love is this idea of having families think about what are all the roles and relationships that they're in, even in a small nuclear family, right? And you can see on here, maybe I'm a grandchild, child, sibling, niece, cousin, spouse, aunt, uncle, parent, beneficiary, trustee, board member, employee, stockholder, partner. The list goes on and on. And really, when you sit and think about it and have everybody write up on a whiteboard, what are all their roles and responsibilities? It's far broader than most people typically think. If you're sitting in a room with mom, dad, and a couple of kids, you're probably going to think, oh, I'm brother, sister, I'm son, father, daughter, mother, whatever it is. It's a broad list. And it's a really important list because in the family meeting context, it's really important that everybody not only understand their communication styles, but the hats they're wearing when they're both communicating to everybody else in the family and when they're being communicated to. And so this story I really love of the father who puts on a hat that says boss. And there actually are families who have printed up hats that do this, but I don't necessarily, again, recommend that you have to go that far. But you're putting on your metaphorical boss hat and saying, hey, son, I hate to tell you, you're fired. And then switching hats to the father hat and saying, hey, son, mom and I just heard that you've been laid off. What can we do to help? And what's so great about that story is recognizing that the perspective and the communication is entirely different. Now, maybe that's not, possible in a particular family, but it's really an important understanding of how the son receives both of those messages and how the father is, in this case, expressing both of those messages. And so understanding and having everybody being really conscious of the hat that they're wearing and the tone they're speaking in and the way they're communicating and the way they're receiving it is part of this whole idea of having a family talk through what are all these different relationships, what are those communications, and what do those mean? So anyway, that's that story. As I mentioned, also, one of the big topics I like to take families through is thinking about what is their capital, right? We automatically think about financial capital. We think about a balance sheet that's filled with numbers and filled with, assets and liabilities. But at the same time, it's really important that we really think in the family context about these broader ideas of capital and what is. And some families, again, have gone as far as putting an actual balance sheet together that shows these items, not just the financial capital, but their human, social, and intellectual capital. And frankly, people use those words not interchangeably, but with slightly different meanings. So I would say human capital generally can simply relate to what is everybody in the family, what are their talents, what can that bring to the table, their social networks, what's their intellectual capital, that's really kind of what's their skill set. Are they a doctor, are they a lawyer, are they an investment banker, are they an artist, are they whatever they are, so you're kind of just looking. I don't think it really matters which circle you're in. And often we're talking about how can the family's financial capital really be used to benefit each family member to further develop these other capitals, their human, social, and intellectual capital. And that obviously becomes particularly true when you're talking about, for example, using the family's financial capital to let everybody pursue educational opportunities or post-educational opportunities, right? And so letting them pursue their dreams and build their human capital is often a result of using their financial capital. Another great example, I love this, sorry, I'm going to stop with little examples, is this quote that's, I guess, attributed to Albert Einstein. I have no idea if it's really him. I think I've seen on the internet some questions as to whether it was him. But I love this because it really is about this idea of human capital. And the quote, obviously, you can read there for yourself. Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life thinking that it's stupid. And what I love about that is, again, this idea that in a family, maybe you've got a teacher, an artist, an investment banker. These people, their human capital is very, very different. And to measure the artist against the investment banker and decide which is the better of the human capital is a really unfair and I would say inappropriate measurement. And so we have to measure everybody's human capital in the family against their own, like what is their skill set and what do they bring to the table. So that's this idea of talking through in a family meeting these different capitals. Another big topic is this idea of responsible ownership. And I find this is a really important topic ultimately for families, especially as children get a little bit older, and that you're really talking about what does it mean to be a responsible owner of this, whatever this is. And this may be the family, this may be an operating business, this may be a financial asset family, but you own something. We all sort of by definition are shareholders in our family enterprise, whatever that is. And the idea of understanding in our family, what is the expectation of our family, so it's very unique again to each family, of being a responsible owner. And so again, this is one that I would say people should take themselves through or with a facilitator, whatever, but not starting with a particular list, but understanding the family's history or values and culture, having a basic financial education, maybe understanding their legal duties, learning competent decision-making, pardon me, I'm so sorry. Being a good steward of wealth. All of these different things are really things that I would say, we're encouraging families to think about. What do they want to define as what does it mean to be a responsible member of this family, a responsible owner of this wealth, whatever amount that is. And I would argue to you that that's at all levels of the wealth spectrum, because we are shareholders in this thing together.
Josh?
Yeah.
I have a quick question. At what stage of life do people typically start these kinds of family meetings? Because you have, a lot of people involved.
Yeah, I think, again, it's yet another question that I'll have to put the caveat that it's very much a decision that each family has to reach. But I would say most families that I have seen or work with, they're starting earlier and earlier. Some families are starting with very, very little kids, like, under 10 years old, and doing things where they're starting to, give them an allowance and doing the traditional, you can save this much, you can spend this much, and you have to give this much away, and creating those buckets and trying to engage them in the idea that the family is philanthropic, or that's how you create spending goals, or whatever those things are. I think, again, it's often tailoring the information to age appropriate and stage appropriate ways. I'll say in my family, as I mentioned, we've been doing this now just at our generation for 20 years. And when we started, my kids didn't exist. And so they were brought in very, very early. They were often sitting in a corner on an iPad. And the idea was that they would absorb by osmosis something. And obviously we weren't flashing balance sheets again up on the wall, right? I mean, they were getting very selected information that they were being exposed to. And now they're young adults and their cousins are all older. My kids are the youngest in that generation. So it's now a much more kind of full disclosure, but they were first exposed to things around our foundation and later exposed to things around the investment portfolio and later exposed to balance sheet issues. And so it's very stage appropriate, but I think it's one where every family has to reach it. But I would say I'm seeing it younger and younger these days. And younger also, by the way, giving those young people in the family a real role. And whether that's that they get a little pot of money that they have to, or maybe the cousins get a little pot of money they have to give away. Maybe it's that we're going to do a service day as a family, go visit an organization that our foundation supports. And so these young children are exposed to that, that whole notion of service. I mean, obviously every family, again, has to do this their own way, but it's, I think the trend is younger and younger. The trend is away from, oh, my 90-year-old parents just died, I'm 60, and I'm just learning that there's some wealth. That's, that's 1 or 2 generations ago. And that is trending quickly to that younger and younger exposure. So and then I think with respect to this whole idea of responsible ownership, once you decide what those pieces are, different family members have to think about, how do I go get that knowledge? And there's obviously lots of ways to get that knowledge. The family can teach itself or teach each other. I think, there's obviously lots of reading resources. There's programs you can join, even joining the boards of nonprofits. All of a sudden, I have a family where the daughter joined a board of a museum. She ultimately became the board chair and suddenly had a vernacular around the investment portfolio because the museum had an endowment and had an investment committee and had all these things. And she picked up a really significant education around things that mattered to the family, but simply because she was pursuing her passion as an artist of being over on this museum board. So lots of ways of accumulating this information and the skill set and building that human capital. Another topic that we often are talking about, and it sort of relates to the responsible ownership, but it is in its own bucket, I think, which is this idea of engaged ownership. And the idea of engaged ownership is both, how do we engage family members, right? Because you can talk at them just as I'm talking at you, and you're probably like rolling your eyes, but you don't want to be talking to the family all the time, right? You want them engaged in this process. And engaged ownership can mean understanding decision-making power. It can mean that, if let's say we own a family business, maybe there's some trusts involved. So now you've got beneficiaries, you've got trustees who are maybe shareholders, you've got maybe individuals who are shareholders. Maybe you've got people who are on the board in the family. Maybe you've got people who are in management. Maybe the CEO of the company is, or somebody of that nature is in the family. So how do you think about, again, this kind of all of these things are interconnected, right? You're circling back to those roles and responsibilities. I can't have a conversation with my sister, who's the CEO, in the same way. Now you're not my sister, now you're the CEO. Maybe I need to deal with you in a slightly different way. Maybe I need to understand, where does decision-making power lie? What are the decisions that really belong to management versus a board versus shareholders versus beneficiaries of a trust? So all of these things are things that need to be, I would say, talked about and kind of understood, both from kind of a good corporate governance standpoint, but also because, again, this overlaps with this whole idea of these different roles and responsibilities that we all have. And in almost every family meeting, I'd say there's an aspect of this notion of financial literacy. And when I talk about financial literacy, at least I mean it in the sense that, again, I'm not trying to get the artist in the family to the same level of investment knowledge as the investment banker. What I'm trying to do is make sure that everybody has, so it's not about getting everybody to the highest level, and it's not everybody getting down to the lowest common denominator. It's about giving everybody an appropriate amount of education so that they can intelligently communicate with each other and most likely with their advisors. And so if there's other family advisors involved, does everybody have enough investment knowledge to have an intelligent conversation, or tax knowledge, or whatever it is that that family needs? And again, every family is going to be somewhat different. So that may be a basic understanding of investments and learning to invest. It may be a basic understanding of different types of legal entities. It may be a basic understanding of how to read financial statements and do financial planning. It may be a basic understanding of different kinds of taxes and tax forms. It may be insurance basics. It may be basics around how trusts operate and how philanthropy operates. Whatever it is, whichever pieces of these different things fall into your family, think about how do we get and convey just enough of that information to make sure that people have the skill set that they need to be able to communicate effectively around these topics. And then another topic we sometimes are thinking about, which really falls into the whole idea of family governance. But in family governance, whether it's through a family office, if you're that big and really can justify a single family office, or whether it's just the idea of saying we want to understand what the map of family governance looks like. This is just an example. But again, it's looking at this idea of, well, maybe everybody is involved at this kind of top family council level, where it's sort of a consensus building, formal or informal body of people who participate. Maybe people rotate in and out as the family gets bigger of the family council, and identifying what are the things that the family council might be responsible for. Is it responsible for setting the direction or the mission of the family? Think about, if there's, even if it's unstated, one day in the past, mom or dad or somebody was kind of responsible for thinking about what's the mission of our family. Now there's maybe a group of people thinking that through. Maybe they're thinking about philanthropy or how to educate the next generation. But that can be, again, a kind of a very formal or informal body, identified however you want to. Most people kind of typically call these a family council, but it could be anything, right? And then we move into a little bit on either sides of this, the left or the right, a little bit more pure corporate governance, right? Maybe there's a family foundation that has a formal board of directors required by law, and we have to follow certain corporate governance type things. Maybe we have an operating business over on the right, or an investment business over on the right, and that has to follow, again, certain corporate formalities or legal formalities, regardless of whether it's a partnership or an LLC or a corporation or whatever the form may be. And maybe someday we have this family office in the middle that's really providing a little bit of this this assistance to everybody. Maybe it's providing planning, maybe it's providing implementing the decisions that are made by these different entities. Maybe it's providing some back office kind of help, but whatever it is. So all of these things, again, are sort of interconnected, and looking at what those governance structures really ought to look like and how we start involving family members. This is one, obviously, that comes fairly later in the family meeting process. The other thing, and this goes to the earlier question about the length of these meetings that you raised, Daniel, or somebody raised. And I think it's really important that you want to try to make these meetings as interactive as possible, right? You want them to be the exact opposite of this webinar, of me just talking at you. You want this to be an interactive conversation about every one of the topics that I just went over and all the others that are on the earlier list. But you also want to build in opportunities to make them interactive, and you want to get people moving around, get them up and going to whiteboards and doing all these things. So some of the things that we do to typically do that, and by the way, these aren't just like to keep people busy. There really is a point to all of these. But some of the things that we're often using, you can see here listed: a values exercise, a risk and influence exercise, a money quiz, an interest exercise, a human capital map, and there's tons and tons of these different things. So I'll show you a couple of them. This is a values exercise that happens to be my favorite. There's a couple or a few out there that are pretty good. This just happens to be the one that I really like. It's called Values Edge. And the idea is you take a family through it, and everybody is identifying their pyramid of their personal individual values. And then there's a process which you can then convert that into figuring out what are the family values. And not only is it interesting to see the family values or the individual values start to take shape, but it's really interesting to see how everybody interprets them and realizing that people have different interpretation of these words, because obviously they're just words, and making sure that it's a communication exercise. And can we talk to each other about what's important to us and why it's important to us? And then this ends up bleeding into lots of other things. I had a family recently who said to me, so why are we doing this? And I said, well, you're going to see. And over time, it was involved in interviewing trustees who were going to be put into the family's trust. It was involved in developing a family's wealth purpose statement. It was involved in drafting trusts themselves. It was involved in putting a mission statement together for the family's foundation. So there were lots of different areas where we kept circling back over a number of years into this idea of why we did this values exercise or refer back to it. Another one I mentioned is this idea of a risk and influence exercise. This was really interesting in our family. I'll use our family because it's easier to use our family and I don't get in trouble as an example. So we did this at our generation at one point, and it was really interesting that you're asking everybody to go up to a big whiteboard and plot sort of where in these quadrants they think are the biggest risks to the family, whatever that may mean, right? You can define it or not define it. So when we did it, we actually happened to have a lot of tax litigation going on. So tax litigation became, right, a big risk to our family. And divorce was a big risk to nobody in our family has ever been divorced, but divorce was like this, everybody was concerned about divorce. And then years later, we had our next generation do it, and they were entirely concerned about different things. They were concerned about geographic diversity. They were concerned about age diversity because there's 20 years between my youngest and my brother's oldest. And so all of a sudden you start to see what you perceive as risk to your family or to your wealth or to the cohesiveness of your family, the collaboration of your family, may be very different between branches, between generations, between individuals. And only by doing something like this can you kind of explore what those things mean. So super, I think, kind of fun and interesting way to get people moving around and scratching their head. If you have younger kids, there's some fun money quizzes out that sort of get into what kind of, I've actually done it with older people too, and it's really fun. You all of a sudden get to kind of what kind of money person are you? And then you can start to talk about money messages and what are the messages that your parents gave to you that you want to either continue or that you actually want to avoid, and what are the money messages that you're giving to your kids, and are those good messages or bad messages, and how do you want to change any of that? So even a money quiz, this is one I actually send out typically in advance because it's really long, but most of these things I try to do with the family in a room at a time. And then we talked a little bit about that human capital idea. So this is an exercise of having people identify the people in sort of the network, and then what are their skills. And so you're really looking at truly mapping kind of in a really fun, interactive way what the family's human capital is. So those are some of the ways that we try to keep these things interactive. Obviously, again, there's lots more topics. I'm going to stop kind of there because I do have, depending upon whether there's any questions, lots more slides of different things if they're relevant to specific questions. But the last thing I'll say about the whole family meeting topic is that follow-up is really important. Again, I'd say this is something that goes on for years and years at a time. And whether it's a facilitator, whether it's a family member who has that responsibility, the idea of follow-up becomes really important. So capturing good notes, capturing what people thought and said. This is an example, as you can see, of a follow-up I did for a family around their values exercise, and then making sure that there's really follow-up and accountability, because this does require, especially if you're only meeting, back to that whole meeting frequency question. If you're meeting once a year, it's making sure that there's some accountability and assignments given over the course of that next year, so that when we come back together a year later, we're spending a little bit of time reviewing, we're trying to remember what we said we were going to do, and making sure that we did it. So I'd say that follow-up process with, again, whether it's within the family or with a facilitator, incredibly important and something you should be focused on. So I'm going to call it there and open up for any other questions that didn't come in while we were going along. And thank you, everybody.
Yeah, I don't know about the questions that didn't come in, but there is one here that did come in, and And it's saying with all the work that's involved, because this is even over years, is obviously work intensive. Are people compensated for this, for their commitment?
Yeah, in terms of somebody designing and facilitating these meetings, yeah,
Within the
absolutely.
family, some to encourage.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Again, I'd say every family treats this a little bit differently. So first of all, on the facilitator side, I'd say absolutely right. You're gonna pay for a facilitator. Although there are investment firms, for example, that do offer this to their highest paying clients as part of their fee, perhaps uh, to those clients. But in the family, I'd say it really is across the board. I've seen families who pay everybody to show up to a meeting. If there's a committee structure, then just like in a board context, you may have family members who are paid per meeting or a stipend per year. I've seen families that don't pay for attendance, but do pay for the cost of getting there. Because if you're coming in from across the country or again across the world, and you've got hotel costs and airfare costs and all these other things that the family somehow absorbs those costs, I think that's really appropriate. Um, I've seen families where people take on specific roles to be specifically compensated for those roles. And even that goes to this whole notion, of roles and responsibilities, where often maybe there's an operating business or an investment business or something else. And the question is, if I'm a family member working within that business, should I be paid market rate? Should I be paid less? Should I be paid, well, probably not more than market rate. There's probably no justification for more. But those are really interesting questions. Again, in our family, I'd say each branch of the family is sort of a 1/3 owner of our family enterprise. And when various members in the family worked in the family enterprise, they were paid market rate so that they weren't feeling like they were being essentially cheated out of, like, because it was maintained that everybody had equal ownership. So those are really questions that, again, a good advisor can help you work through, but are really, the answers are across the board.
Right. I mean, to your point earlier, where people jet in from locations around the world, is this, I mean, what is the advantage of being in person, or can this be done online?
Yeah, it's so obviously everything over the last, what are we now, 20 months or whatever we are into COVID, has shown us an ability to do things online in a way that even if we were doing it before, now everybody is much more accustomed to it and much more comfortable with it. Having said that, I would say if you're looking at your initial family meeting, and depending upon what the agenda is, in person, I personally believe can't be beat and is really important. Um, in addition, if you're bringing in an outside facilitator who people don't know, right? We all still, I mean, there's people who I've met now on Zoom who I feel like I know. And when I walk into a room, I'm going to be like, oh, nice to see you, and realize all of a sudden I've never met you before. But I think that there's something about in person that really is hard to beat. So I would argue to you, if you're doing this for the first time, and depending upon the agenda, that you really focus on in person, at least periodically. And then if you're going to do some Zoom meetings, or probably not supposed to push Zoom. So if you're going to do Zoom or GoToMeeting or WebEx or whoever you're going to do, if you're going to do a video meeting, that you do it with topics that are frankly less controversial, and that the more that the people involved really know each other and have that comfort with each other. So I think a hybrid's fine, but I would do as much in person as you can.
Right. And obviously the other side of that coin is what happens to families that don't have meetings like this.
Yeah.
In other words, just let it go by itself.
So again, obviously the answers are all over the board. I think that depending upon I mean, if there's a family that has, so first of all, I hate to make this all about the money, but the reality is most of these conversations are occurring because there's some money. And so if the family is handing down that wealth and they're saying, here's your third, your third, your third, and that's the end of the conversation, maybe that's fine. but you obviously can pick up the newspaper, I wouldn't say weekly, but certainly pretty frequently, and see some wealthy families splashed across the front page where there's litigation because somebody got something they thought somebody else didn't deserve, or because there was an inability to communicate about these issues, or a trustee did something that somebody in the family thinks they shouldn't have done. So if this whole notion of the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves proverb is important to you, then family meetings are going to help set you on that path to give your family members the ability to communicate about these issues and resolve these problems, not on the courthouse steps. Some families, I think really benefit from this because you end up, even if you're short of the courthouse steps, of families that are no longer talking to each other. So I think that there are all kinds of reasons to do it. It again is probably important to understand the particular family situation. If you've got a family that's got $1 million at stake versus $1 billion at stake, those are very different dynamics around those two things, but both can benefit greatly from bringing everybody together and learning how to communicate.
Well, I want to break in here. That's about all the time we have for questions. Thank you again for such interesting content, really good stuff. And thank you, Daniel, again for moderating. I want to thank the organizations that have made it possible for us to be here today. For our attendees, look for an email soon with a link to the replay of this event, and you're welcome to share that replay with your friends and family. Here at Advice Chaser, we're all about helping you find an advisor who's a good fit for your life and your financial questions. Our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners has committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. Find out more by going to advicechaser.com and clicking on the link to find an advisor. Once again, from Advice Chaser, thanks so much, and we will see you at another webinar soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.